Bio. We're going to finish up section 2 here. We're going to look at how evolution is genetic change in our second part. So we're going to jump right in with how, again, evolution relates to our genetics and a phenomenon that is known as genetic drift. So how does this lead to evolution? So genetic drift is defined as just simply a random change in our allele frequency. So genetic drift, all it is that somehow, some way, the number of alleles randomly change inside, or the frequency, so yes, the number of alleles randomly change inside of population. And so one way that this can happen is that inside of small populations, individuals that carry a particular allele may leave more descendants than others do just by chance. So there can really be no rhyme or reason if there's no benefit. Let's say color is always a good example to use. So let's say it's a beetle that survives really well in autumn, so there could be red, orange, brown, yellow, all those beetles, all those different colors can exist in this one beetle population, and then it can just be random and which one will leave the most offspring because they'll have an equal chance of survival. And so over time, a series of chance occurrences of this type can cause an allele to become common in a population. So again, if we have brown, yellow, orange, and red beetles, again, it's just whichever one by chance just so happens to take over to do the best, then it can become a dominant color. We could have a population that used to be an even mix of 4 colors can just be 1 or 2 colors or just one color that's kind of been taken over again. And so then genetic drift again may also occur when a small group of individuals will colonize a new habitat. So let's say our group of beetles just decides to move to another side of the river. A small group goes over there and there's a completely different environment on one side of the river and they colonize that habitat. So individuals may carry alleles in different relative frequencies than did the larger population from which they came. So we could have, again, if a majority of them are brown, there are still some that carry the yellow, but let's say those ones that carry the yellow are the ones that decided to move to the other side of the river. And so therefore, this new population is going to be different from their parent population because they have more yellow than brown. And so for an example, again, I've kind of been alluding to this, so this is the example the book used. And so this is kind of how genetic drift looks broken down. So again, this picture right here with this circle, and look, we have our brown, our yellow, and our red, and our orange beetles. So this is all the same beetle, it's just a genetic variation can lead to different colors. And so this population, so let's say these 4 beetles on the left, they go and they stay on one side of the river, to whereas we have founding population B, those beetles fly across the other side of the river and they decide to colonize over there. So therefore, if we look, now our population A is a mixture of brown, mainly just brown and yellow, because if you look, our founders for population A were brown and yellow with a little bit of orange. Then population B, look, we have red, orange, and yellow, and then majority are red, orange, and yellow found in population B, again, because those are the founders of that population. And so when allele frequencies change due to the migration of a small subgroup, so again, this population B left, so now they're completely different from population A. So when the allele frequencies change due to that migration, that movement of that small group, it is known as the founder effect. So this is an important kind of term to need to go right along with genetic drift, is the founder effect. So since these right here, these 8 total beetles are the founders for their population is going to look more like them than any other, so that is called our founder effect. So that is how genetic drift plays a role in changing the allele frequencies. So now we're going to look at evolution versus what is known as genetic equilibrium. So genetic equilibrium is kind of the exact opposite of evolution, and we will get to that in a second. So the Hardy-Weinberg principle, so this is, again, we've had you define those two words in your word search, and it states that allele frequencies in a population will remain constant unless one or more factors cause those frequencies to change. So when these frequencies remain constant, it is called genetic equilibrium. So again, I'll probably ask you a question on the quiz. What is the term that is the exact opposite of evolution? And the exact opposite of evolution is genetic equilibrium. And what it's saying is we have a principle that states that genetic equilibrium will be the overriding thing. It will happen if there are forces that fail to act on a population. And so there's 5 conditions that are required to maintain genetic equilibrium from generation to generation. So there must be random mating, and we'll explain each one of these kind of more in depth and why, in fact, it usually does not occur. So we'll talk about that more. And so the population must be very large. There can be no movement into or out of the population, and there can be no mutations, and there can be no natural selection. So in order for us to not have evolution, all of these things must occur. And we're going to come to find out pretty quickly that none of these things really ever occur, because evolution is always acting on populations, and therefore our genetic frequencies, our allele frequencies, are always changing. So random mating is our first stipulation. So random mating ensures that each individual has an equal chance of passing on its alleles to their offspring. So that kind of goes to the fact that males and females show no preference, they just want to mate with whoever. However, in natural populations, mating is rarely completely random because many species select mates based on particular heritable traits. So another example was, it could be that our crab claws. So the females are obviously going to want the males that have the bigger claws because they're going to be stronger. They're not going to mate with any male. They're going to want to find the ones that have the biggest claws. So random mating rarely ever happens as well. And so a large population. So genetic drift has less effect on large populations than it does on small ones, and allele frequencies of large populations are less likely to be changed through the process of genetic drift. So it is possible for a population to be large enough where it could be hard to affect. So this is the one that can kind of help maintain genetic equilibrium, is having a large population. And also, in order for genetic equilibrium to occur, we can have no movement into or out of a population. And so this is necessary because individuals may bring new alleles into a population, and there must be no movement of individuals into or out of a population. So because the fact that if a new beetle moves in that could be green, that could bring some green alleles into a population. And so therefore, genetic change will occur, genetic equilibrium will no longer be in place. And the population's gene pool must be kept together and kept separate from gene pools of other populations. So again, this rarely happens. Things are constantly moving, trying to find food, trying to find mates, so no movement into or out of a population rarely ever occurs. And mutation, so no mutations can occur if we want genetic equilibrium to be in place. So if genes mutate, new alleles may be introduced into the population and allele frequencies will change. So we know our bodies are not perfect. They're always going to mutate, and that occurs in other animals as well. So again, it's another strike against genetic equilibrium. And then no natural selection. So we know for a fact natural selection does occur, and all genotypes in the population must have equal probabilities of survival and reproduction. Again, that's if genetic equilibrium is to occur. And no phenotype can have an advantage over another, so we know that that is not the case, and there can be no natural selection operating on the population. So again, genetic equilibrium is the exact opposite of evolution, and it rarely ever stays in place because all of these factors are usually acting on populations all the time. So that is it for section 2. Let me know if you have any questions.